Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. Good morning again. So we're continuing with the complete guide to the RPA. So we're really digging in, for the last couple of weeks, it's been really working on one paragraph. So what we're doing is kind of combining other trainings that I might do as a separate topic, and we're incorporating them right into our discussion of the RPA. As we do that, we're doing both, filling in, writing in the RPA itself, how we would fill out those amendments, addenda, or any of the other ancillary forms that would go with it, and then even talking about counteroffers for the listing agents. So with that, I am going to share my screen so that we can start up. And what you should be looking at right now is this out of here. What you guys should be looking at right now is paragraph, where to jump ahead. 3LM is where we're going to go. We talked about contingent sales last week, both contingent from a buyer's perspective, and also if a seller were contingent. That's what we covered last week. So we're going to move on now. So we're going to look at paragraph 3M, and we're going to look at possession. Okay. So when we're talking about time of possession, that is just when the buyer actually becomes the owner of the property, right? Like, I am the owner on this day. I take possession of the property. I don't know that you need to change anything on this. So what it does is it's based on the notice of recordation. So instead of having a specific time, you would say, hey, listen, as soon as we get our confirmation of recording, then this buyer is now the owner. Seller is no longer the owner. I think that it's probably the best way just to leave that as it is. Okay, there's no need to change that. Seller occupied or vacant units. You know what? And it mentions the TOPA right here, but we'll get to the TOPA when we get down to 3M3. Seller occupied or vacant units is where we're going to spend most of our time. Because we're going to talk about what happens when a seller remains in possession. And I think a lot of times what happens for agents is they just say, oh, seller's going to remain in possession. They don't spend a lot of time either having the conversation with their buyer on what that means and with their seller on what it means for you to remain in possession after the close of escrow. So there are two choices when we look at paragraph 3M2 for the seller to remain in possession after the close of escrow. If it's going to be 29 or fewer days, right? So let's just say it's going to be 10, okay? Then when it is less than the 29 days, you must use the form SIP, right? So you guys see that has SIP. If for some reason the seller needs to remain for 30 days or longer, let's say for some reason it's 45, then we would use the form RLAS, okay? Regardless of the amount of time, one of those two forms has to be used. So if you're even staying 1 day after the close of escrow, or 3, which is the most common, right, that we will negotiate 3 days after close of escrow, you have to include the form SIP. Must be included. It is a necessity. It is not just an option, or it is not we're not advising you to use it. We're telling you have to use it. Okay, so remember, for you as buyer's agents, because the focus that we look at when we're talking about being a buyer's agent, the focus is writing as strong as an offer as possible. The other thing is also making sure that your clients are informed and aware of what the process is going to look like, right? So if I know that I'm writing an offer on a property that is seller occupied, Right, we're not even going to get into the contingents. We talked about those last week, but with contingent sales, there has to be a minimum of 7 days. I would suggest that you guys all do 10 days after close of escrow from either side, right? If you're a buyer's agent writing an offer knowing it is contingent on the seller finding a replaceable property, or if you are a listing agent that's countering to tell people that it's contingent, please ask for that 10 days, because a lot of things happen and stuff gets delayed and you have to wait for second closings. So 10 days, I'm telling you right now, 10 days should be your go-to on seller contingencies. But let's just look at a normal one, right? Seller's not contingent. They just are living in the property and they're going to move out. They're not a problem, right? There's no issues. Then they need to stay the 3 days. And the reason I always say at least the 3 days is because you want to give them time to be able to move out. And if there's any issues, right? Sometimes when sellers remain in possession of the property, it's not because they're being malicious, just stuff happens. People got sick, the truck didn't show up, the movers were late, they had to, there's all kinds of real world reasons that is not just them saying, I don't care, I'm not moving. Now, does that happen? Absolutely. We'll talk about that. So let's just say, for example, we have a very simple seller remaining in possession for 3 days after close of escrow. We put that in the offer, then we have to include the form SIP. And did I not add it? I did not. Seller license to remain in possession. Now I did. So seller license to remain in possession addendum has to be included. If I'm sending it with my offer, terrific. I just leave this as it is. If I'm including an SIP as a listing agent where I'm doing a counteroffer, then I'm going to check this box and I'm going to make it subject to seller counteroffer number 1. Okay? That could be a multiple counter. It's not excluding multiple counters. It's just a seller counteroffer. Okay? If the buyer is now including one, like if we're negotiating one, then, if this was another one, you would do that. But for now, we sent it with our offer because we know that the seller is remaining in possession. Okay. Here's the property address, the buyers, the sellers. Okay. The addendum is intended to grant seller a license to remain in possession of and use the property after close of escrow. It is intended for short-term occupancy, for example, 29 days or less. If occupancy is intended to be for 30 days or longer, parties are advised to use residential lease after sale. Regardless of the length of time of possession, buyers are advised to consult with a qualified local landlord attorney to discuss whether the possession could be interpreted as creating a landlord-tenant relationship between buyer and seller. Note, local rent control or other law regarding tenants' rights may impact buyer and seller's right to and obligations. Close of escrow shall be day 0 for the purposes of counting days for the term of this license to remain in possession. So, close escrow today, right? Thursday, the 18th, day 1 of that possession term is Friday, tomorrow. So if we close today and we had given the seller 10 days to remain in possession, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of next week. That's their 10 days. Okay. So today would be day 0 close of escrow. Okay. So term. The next section is term. Seller is granted a license to remain in possession of the property for blank calendar days after close of escrow or to a specific date as long as it doesn't exceed 29 days. Number of days that they're going to stay or a specific date, right? As long as it doesn't exceed 29 days. That's what you have to know for this. So, for example, if I wanted to put a date ahead of time of October, today we're the 18th, so 30 days would be here. If I want to do this, I'm going to get out October 16th. This SIP would still be valid. Okay. But generally, it's just easier to put the number of days we need to stay. So I'm going to put 10 days. Okay. For this example, we're doing 10 days. Until 6 p.m. That is a default. Now, if you want to change the time, you could change it. Right? With the date, you could change it. Otherwise, with this 10 days, it's 6 p.m. Okay. Seller has no right to remain in possession beyond this term and may be responsible for court-awarded damages if seller does remain. That's what you have to make sure that your seller understands, that, hey, if we're going to negotiate a period of time, so this is now me as listing agent, I'm going to send this back as a counter. If we're going to do that, the conversation I have to have with my seller is, look, we're going to negotiate for you to have X amount of days at zero cost. Now, right now, we could do that because we're still in the market where it's, technically it's still a seller's market. I know that sellers are doing more concessions, and they're giving in more, and prices have been reduced a bit. But as interest rates have come down and more buyers hit the market, we're going to get back into that, in that mode where the sellers, and because the inventory is still not growing hugely, that there's still going to be some competition, and sellers are going to have some bit of an upper hand, especially in our market areas. I can't speak for all of the state of California or the rest of the United States where people may be watching this at some point on YouTube, but for us right now, there is still a little bit of leverage where a seller can negotiate to remain in possession after the close of escrow for a specific amount of time at no cost. Now, if you don't negotiate this at the beginning, because we see that a lot, is where the seller goes, no, I'm going to move out. Don't worry about it. Don't put that, right? They tell the listing agent, don't do that. I'm going to move out. I'll be out before we close. Don't worry about it. And then inevitably we get to closing and they're like, yeah, we need to stay for about a week. Now, if you're going to do it that way, if that's going to be your MO, if you're not pushing your sellers, and as a listing agent, what I would tell you is, even if my seller told me I'm not going to be a problem, I'm going to be out at close, I'm still putting this in. And that's what I'm going to tell them. I'm going to say, you know what? I understand, and I'm sure you will be out, but just in case there's an emergency, we're going to put this in with at least 3 days at no cost to you. And then we'll build in a per diem if for some reason that emergency extends past the 3 days. But we'll get to that late in a moment, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. But if I were a listing agent, even if my seller told me absolutely I'm going to be out, I'd do it anyway, because there's been so many times, and I'm sure those of you guys that are out there that have done, transactions in the past where a seller remained in possession, or you didn't think they were going to, and then needed to. As a listing agent, it's happened so many times. You have no idea how many conversations I have with people about, when my seller's not moving out now, what do I do? Right? So let's plan ahead. Let's assume they're not going to be out, even if they are, which would be terrific. Let's assume they're not, and let's build this in. Anytime you have a seller that is living in the property that you are selling, build this in. If it's vacant, no problems. You don't have to worry about it. Doesn't matter. But if you have a seller that's living here, that's what you got to do. Now, if there's grown children in the house, you've got to treat them a bit like tenants. So what I would have, and we'll talk about that with the TOPA, I'd have a conversation with the sellers about making sure the adult children are out before close of escrow, but we'll talk about that with the TOPA. So here we are, 10 days. We're going to ask for that 10 days to be free. So this consideration section right here, this too, is for this amount of time. This consideration 2A is for the time that we're remaining in possession. So if that remaining in possession is going to be 0, then you're going to put the 0 in, okay? This one will let you type a 0, okay? Now, if you are going to, if you're saying, hey, listen, I need to say 10, 12, 15 days, whatever, and I want to be considerate of the buyer, I'm going to go ahead and pay, then you could, of course, you could do that. Now, if I'm a buyer's agent and I'm fighting to get my offer accepted, then I'm probably going to go with the 0. If I'm a buyer's agent and now I start negotiating with the sellers that didn't originally tell me they needed the time, I'm going to ask for some money in here if we're going to include this. If we're going back and forth on amendments, my version of this license remaining in possession is going to have some amount of money in here. Okay, that is due at the close of escrow. Now, let's say that for some reason we had $100 was going to be the term for this 10 days, so it'd be $1,000. You could check the box for held in escrow right here, and then what will happen is escrow will just pull it out of their proceeds for those 10 days. But if this is 0, you don't have to worry about that, okay? This late charge NSF checks, they're not paying you rent technically here with this, anything, so it doesn't matter because there is no late charge, there is no non-sufficient fund charge. I wouldn't worry about that too much. It doesn't let you put a 0 in here. It doesn't stay, as you can see. So if you want to, you can handwrite it later after you do it, but leaving it blank is fine. Okay. Here's where we get to the seller's obligations. And these are some of these next few paragraphs, I think, especially when we get down to paragraph 6, are things that people don't pay attention to. Seller shall make reasonable efforts to maintain the property, including pool, spa, landscaping, and grounds, and all personal property included in the sale in substantially the same condition as on the date of acceptance of the agreement or as modified by the agreement. However, seller shall not be responsible for any latent defects or any damage or destruction that is not caused by seller or that is out of the control of seller. Buyer is advised to obtain homeowner's insurance to cover any damages that may occur after the close of escrow, and consult with the insurance agent regarding coverage in light of this license for seller to remain in possession, except as provided in this agreement. Seller shall not make any alterations to the property without buyer's written consent. So what they're saying is you've got to take care of it. And if you damage it in any way that you're responsible for, seller, while you're there, you're responsible for it. But if something happens, I mean, if I'm if I'm now basically the tenant, I'm the seller, and there's an earthquake and the back wall falls down, I'm not responsible for that any longer, right? Because that was out of my control. Somebody drives through the front of the house, something that is out of the control of the seller. That's not the seller who's remaining in possession. They're not responsible for those damages. Unfortunately, the buyer who is the new owner. That's why, excuse me, it suggests that you consult your homeowner's insurance and make sure that your insurance is going to cover you while you have those sellers in possession and you're the owner, okay? But the seller's got to maintain it. They got to mow the lawn, right? You're going to be there for, 2 weeks, 29 days. You got to mow the lawn. You got to clean the pool. You got to do all the stuff that you were doing prior to, because when I move in, it's supposed to look the way it was when I did my final walkthrough. Okay? And that's another thing I will say, and we'll talk about it again when we actually get to the final walkthrough. If you are a buyer that is a seller is remaining in possession at close of escrow, I don't want to see any more that we're going to do our walkthrough after they move out. You've got to do the walkthrough before you close. You have to do the walkthrough before you close. Okay? You want to see it before you close escrow if there was any damages, any new damages. You need to see before you close escrow if there's any new damage, so you know when they move out if they caused that damage while you were the owner or while they were the owner. Okay? So please stop delaying your walkthrough because the seller's remaining in possession. That doesn't matter. You still got to do your walkthrough 5 days before you close. So if there's any issues, you have the ability to get those fixed before you close escrow. Okay? So it's just a little soapbox thing, but we'll talk about that with walkthroughs. Okay. Delivery of possession. Seller shall deliver the property in the condition and on the terms provided in the agreement. That's it. Delivery of possession fee. This is a place where I think most agents miss. They don't put anything in here. The delivery of possession fees, in addition to the license fee specified in paragraph 2, that means if they're paying something for the time that they're remaining in possession, which in this case they are not, $0 for those 10 days, seller agrees to deposit with escrow holder or such funds shall be withheld from seller's proceeds a delivery of possession fee in the amount of, at close of escrow, this fee will be released to buyer or held in escrow. Within 5 days after delivery of possession to buyer, buyer shall return to the delivery of possession fee to the seller if the property is delivered to buyer in the conditions specified in paragraphs 3A and B. Right? That was the maintenance, and that they delivered it on time. Okay? The thing is that the buyer doesn't ever get to keep this. The buyer can't keep that money, right? They can't keep that money. There may be, if it's excessive, like that the seller remains in possession for months and it's causing all kinds of maybe. But if they stay for 1 day over, you're not going to get to keep whatever that fee is. Okay, so delivery of possession fee, that's a negotiating thing. I would say maybe based on sales price, right? You're going to be somewhere between $5,000 and maybe $25,000 that they're going to leave behind, right? And what it is it's just an incentive for them to get out, because if they stay there, they don't get that money, right? So if they stay past the 3 days or the 10 days or the 29 days, whatever it is that you negotiated on this SIP, they just don't get it. It just sits in escrow. And most people need the money, right? When they're leaving there, whether they're buying something or not, they want their money. So what this is more just an incentive for them to move on time, to follow the terms of this, okay? Delivery, utilities. Seller agrees to pay for all utilities and any related utility services and the following charges. So let's say that there is a gardener that the seller was paying, or that they said, whatever, there's somebody that does maintenance, there's the Orkin people come and get rid of pests, or whatever it is. If there's some service that's happening on the property that's going to remain on the property that they need to pay for, mostly it's just utilities. If there's something that the buyer's going to pay for, you write in what it is. Like if the buyer says, oh, you guys didn't have a gardener, we're going to start sending our gardener, fine, you could pay the gardener, right? The buyer's going to pay the gardener. But the seller has to continue to pay the utilities. You can't say after possession, you can't say, I close escrow today and I'm going to stay here for 10 or 12 or 15 or 29 days and then call and say, oh, yeah, you need to switch the utilities over to the buyer's name. No. Don't switch the utilities till the seller moves out. The seller's got to pay those utilities, okay? Entry. This is another thing that people forget to talk to about with their sellers, is now that the seller has become a tenant, they have the owner, the buyer who is now the owner of the property, has the same rights as a landlord may have. Seller shall make property available to buyer for the purpose of entering to make necessary agreed repairs, or to supply necessary or agreed services, or to show property to prospective or actual purchasers, tenants, mortgagees, lenders, appraisers, or contractors. Necessary repairs and services include, but are not limited to, repairs and services required by the buyer's lender or insurer. Buyer and seller agree that 24 hours notice, oral or written, shall be reasonable and sufficient notice. In an emergency, buyer may enter the property at any time without prior notice. Buyer may not move personal property into property without prior written consent from the seller. So you've got to tell your seller that once they're in there for that 10, 12, 15, 29 days, that if the buyer calls them and says, hey, tomorrow I need to bring a contractor by to take a look at the property because they have to repair something, you can't deny it. It says oral or written. I don't even have to give you written notice. I just have to give you 24-hour notice, and you got to give me access to the property. Now, I can't just go in there and start putting my stuff in your garage. I can't go in there and say, oh, they got a shed, I'm going to start storing stuff in the shed because it's empty. I can't do that as seller. I can't just knock on the door and say, you got to let me in today. No, I got to give you 24-hour notice. And I'm sure, too, if you give 24-hour notice and there's some kind of scheduling conflict, we can move things around. But the thing is, the seller's got to be open to that. The buyer now, who's the owner, has the right to come into that property to do the things that they need to do. So you've got to make sure that when you're talking to your seller about, hey, we need to stay here, for 29 days or whatever it is. By the way, if the buyer needs access to have a contractor or to fix something or to start some repairs that they were supposed to get done, you have to let them. You don't have a choice. Now, we say you don't have a choice, but now the issue becomes, what do you do? Well, just like a tenant, right? Then I have to give them a 3-day notice to cure or quit. And if they don't do that, then I can evict them. By the time I go through all that process, they're going to get out anyway. So again, that's the other side of it, is you have to have a conversation with your buyers when you're the buyer's agent, like, hey, yes, they have to give you access. But if they're not, the recourse for them not giving you access is going to exceed the time that they're going to be there generally. And so you might as well just be prepared. But you should have access. Okay? Now, if it starts to cost you money or you have a problem because they're not abiding by the terms of the contract, like it said at the beginning, if they don't abide civilly, there could be some damages that the seller could be responsible for. So if something doesn't get taken care of that was supposed to get taken care of, if you lose a contract or it costs you money because of a mover because they don't move out, stuff like that, if you can prove damages, you can get those damages paid for. Okay? Keys and other items included. By default, this says sellers shall provide keys and other items necessary to access the property as required in the agreement at close of escrow. So if you guys don't check this little box, which most people don't, because I don't think you guys read past this section where you fill stuff out. If you don't check that box, then at close of escrow, you've got to give copy of keys to the buyer, which means they have keys to the property. Most sellers are not going to like that. So we know it's there. Check the box. And once we check the box, then it says I don't have to give you keys until I move out, until I deliver possession to you based on this term of me remaining in possession. That will make your sellers happier. And the thing is that you know, you sellers are not going to like the idea that the buyer can come in, right? So make sure you're checking that box. And they're really not going to be happy with you when you tell them you got to give them keys at close of escrow. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm living here still. Well, no, but that's what the agreement said. So please make sure you're checking the box. Assignment of subletting. Seller shall not assign or sublet all or any part of the property. I mean, I think that should be a given, but it's there. They can't give anybody else access to live in the property. Just like I negotiated 29 days as seller, I can go now. I'm ready to leave, but you know what? I'm going to let my brother stay here for the next 19 days since I moved out early. No, you can't do that. I mean, it says they'll give the right for buyer to terminate the seller's license remain in possession. That's great, but now they just become a tenant, and now I'm doing an eviction anyway. And if the people are going to move out, they're going to move out prior to any of that needing to happen. Insurance, seller's personal property, including vehicles, is not insured by buyer, and if applicable, not by the owner's association against loss or damage due to fire, theft, vandalism, rainwater, criminal or negligent acts of others, or any other cause. Seller is advised to carry seller's own insurance to protect seller from such loss and to contact its own insurance carrier to discuss available options. There you go. So you got to tell them, hey, by the way, if something happens here, your personal property, right? You're a tenant now. Your personal property is not protected by somebody breaking in and stealing it catching fire, it floods in here and ruins everything. None of that stuff is protected. So if you feel like you need to have some other kind of insurance to protect yourself from damage or anything like that, then you've got to talk to your own insurance company. Okay. Okay. Number 9. This is another thing that I think happens a lot of times when there's an issue. So seller, buyer, whoever breaches the agreement. They do one thing wrong, right? And then they assume because you allowed them to get away with that now they can basically do whatever they want, like it voids the contract for some reason. I like that it just has a little bit in here that says the waiver of any breach shall not be construed as a continuing waiver of the same or any subsequent breach. So let's say that I give 24-hour notice to the seller and say, I want to move in. I mean, I want to come in. I need to do some measurements. My guy's going to be there, my designer, my decorator, my contractor, whatever. And they tell you no. And you go, you know what? It's okay. I'll let you off the hook this time. If they ask again and you say no, just because they let you get away with it the first time doesn't mean that you get away with it this time, right? So if there is any consequences, they can now take action against you. But you have to understand that as the seller. So make sure that, I think a lot of times what happens is that as agents, we're just very cavalier about all of this, and we just say, oh, don't worry about it. You're going to stay in possession for 3 days. We don't tell them all this other stuff. We don't tell them they're still responsible to pay the utilities. We don't tell them they're still responsible to upkeep the property. We don't tell them that they have to figure out their insurance because if something happens, if there's a fire or a flood, their personal property is not insured. Only the property itself is insured. And they don't have any recourse if they don't have that insured. So we have to make sure that we're discussing these things with the buyer and the seller. And then we're talking to the buyer, we've got to explain to them that the seller sometimes does stay past the time that we agreed here, right? Just like we talked about in the RPA. Sometimes they stay. If they say they're going to get out in the close of escrow and they don't. So what I would suggest, and this is specific for seller to protect them specifically to remaining in possession, not any of the other breaches. Not if they don't manage to take care of the property, not if they don't pay the utilities, not if they, don't give access to the property. This next section is not going to protect them from that or whatever the cost of that may be. But from just remaining in possession longer than the term agreed upon. Okay? In here, as a seller or a buyer, you're going to include this. Okay? Seller agrees to a per diem of $150 to a per diem of $150 if seller remains in possession beyond day 10 after COE. Okay. So with just that, what it says is, hey, I'm going to give you 10 days for free, seller. But if you stay 12 days, you're going to pay me, you agree to pay me $300. Okay? Benefit for the buyer in that is it a guaranteed, I've already agreed to that amount of money. I don't have to prove any damages caused by you staying past the term. Okay? So let's say that there is no per diem. We don't have this little holdover built in. Seller stays 4 days. Buyer has already, 4 days past the 10, right? So they're at day 14. And they are not being malicious. They're like, there was an issue. We couldn't move to our new house. We had nowhere to go. We had so much stuff. We didn't want to put it in a store or whatever. We just couldn't leave. They're not being jerks, right? But the buyer had arranged to move in because they knew, hey, they're going to be out on day 10. So let's sometimes around day 2 or day 13, let's move in because we know for sure they'll be out. So even then you're looking ahead, right? Because that doesn't even happen. Most of the time the buyer's already scheduled everybody or they're standing on the porch on day 10. Like, are you guys moving out? But let's just say they were conscientious of the fact that there's, sometimes you need a little buffer. They scheduled somebody for day 12 after the close of escrow to move them all in, right? They got movers, they hired everybody, and now they can't move. So they have to cancel it. And it cost them $1,000 cancellation fee. Okay? If they could prove that the reason they had to pay that fee was because the seller didn't move out, then the seller could be responsible for that. But in order to do that, what I have to do is I have to go to small claims court. I have to show proof. It takes months and months and months. Okay. If I put in here this $150 per diem or the $300 per diem or $200 per diem or whatever number you come up with, and they move out, then even if I do have to go to small claims, I don't even have to prove that the damage was caused by them. All I have to prove is that they remained longer than day 10, and they owe me that money. So that's the benefit to the buyers. I don't have to prove anything else. I just have to do it. I just have to show that they remained in possession past day 10, and that money should be mine. Okay? I say should be. There's no guarantees with small claims. And for the seller, I'm going to tell you this is a better deal. Because if I, as seller, agreed to a per diem of $150 or $200 and it cost me maybe $300 to $600 because I remain in possession for 3 days longer than I was supposed to, I know that that is the extent of my damage based on that breach, right? That's based on the breach of contract that I remained past where I said I was going to. I only have to pay $300 or $600. On the flip side, if I don't want to agree to a per diem like that as seller, and the buyer can prove an excess damages, things that happen. Maybe they lost time at work, they had to rent a hotel, they had to buy storage, they had to reschedule movers, and the whole thing ended up costing them $3,500. And they go to small claims court and sue the seller for that $3,500 and win. The seller has no fight because they did breach the contract. But if I'm the buyer and I make all those mistakes, I rent all those things, or I'm the seller and I stay 3 days, and I'm the buyer that, still schedules everything, and I have to cancel everything, and I have to move out, and I have to get a hotel, my only recourse is going to be that $300 or $600. So honestly, these per diems are a better deal for the seller because it limits the amount of damage. The only thing it does for the buyer is that it removes the fact that I have to prove that I had damages. That's it. Okay. And Melvin says, I would ask per diem since the first day after close of escrow. Well, then you wouldn't do it here. You would do it here. If you want the seller to pay for all those 10 days, then you would do it here. That's not a per diem anymore. That's their agreement for the term of being there. That doesn't eliminate that they would have to pay an additional $150 if they remain in, because that just says for the term. It's per day. Seller should deposit the funds. That's fine. All that stuff. That's per day. But now let's say that they stay 10 days and you're going to pay $150. Well, that's $1,500. That $1,500 is deposited in escrow. Great. Buyer gets that when we close. If they stay for 15 days more and you don't have a per diem in here, then there is no agreement on what money they're going to pay. That $150 doesn't carry over when the term ends. So you still have to put something in here. Now, that's fine. If you would ask for the per diem from the day they close, if you want to charge them for this 10 days, that's great. I think that if we're in the market that we're in, where there still is a little bit of competition, where people are still buying houses over asking price, if the market changes and houses begin sitting much, much, much longer and it starts to turn into a buyer's market, absolutely, you could ask for as much money as you want per day for those days that they remove. I think right now it's going to be a case-by-case basis. I wouldn't just say yes for sure, ask for it, or yes for sure, don't. I would say I would look at the case on the property that I'm working with, how long it's been on the market, those kind of things. Okay? So that's it. That's how we would do the SIP. Okay? This is how we would do the SIP. Everybody signs, send it with your offer if you're the buyer's agent and you know that they have to remain in possession. Sarah had put in chat a while ago that she puts on the MLS close of escrow +3. I mean, that's not binding on the MLS, but it is good to let people know, hey, by the way, I'm going to need it. Most agents don't pay attention anyway, so just make sure if you're a listing agent, you're prepared to counter that, and you are countering it. I would tell you, again, my advice to you as listing agents, if your seller says, no, don't worry, I'm going to get out, I would still include it. I would still include it, because even if they move out 2 weeks before it closes, great. The SIP was there. Doesn't change anything. You don't have to remove it. You don't have to do it. It just says if the seller remains in possession. Well, they're not. Excuse me. You can do an amendment later after when you get to the close of escrow to remove that, so that you don't have to put money in escrow or anything like that. But I would just suggest as a safeguard for all of you, because it's too many times that we see where a seller says, don't worry, I'm going to be out at the close of escrow, and they're not. Okay, and they're not. So let's look at the residential lease after sale. We're not. It's a longer document, obviously, than an SIP. Excuse me, I was choking. It's a longer document because now it's a lease. This is for 30 days plus. The majority of you are not going to be dealing with a property where it's 30 days plus. Most sellers are only going to be there for 5, 10, 15 days, something like that. Okay? That's just how it's going to work. So what you need to do is this is for those special cases that, thanks, Mel, for the water. He saw me choking and he brought me water. That was nice. So, all right. So this is for those special cases where it's gonna exceed that 29 days, which is 30 days plus, and you have to have this in there. It talks about how they're gonna pay their rent, how they're gonna do all those things. So the date, this one doesn't, as you can see, it doesn't really reference back to the purchase agreement as much. It just does the property of the purchase agreement and the date of the purchase agreement. Okay. The housing provider rents to tenant, and tenant rents from housing provider the real property and improvements described as what the address is of the property. That's the premises. Now, you could already tell by the verbiage that it's changed from buyer and seller to housing provider and tenant. So this really is getting more into that tenant landlord relationship, or the new verbiage of housing provider and tenant. Okay. The premises are for the sole use as a personal residence by the following named persons only. Just like a lease, you want to make sure that the buyers are the ones that are on there, right? So whatever buyers we had, and I don't remember who that was Jane and Jim Smith, and that should also here be Jane and Jim Smith, right? So if they don't have any adult children, there's you don't, if you want, you could list the kids, but you don't. No. The personal property, okay, any person in the premises other than those listed in this paragraph are considered guests. Guests are not permitted to stay more than 14 days. So if they do have children, maybe you want to put them on there. You don't need to if they're minors, but if they have adult children who are going to be staying with them after the close, it becomes a little bit trickier because they're not. But if you're going to do it, I would put them on there just because then they become, part of the term of this agreement. Okay. The personal property listed in the purchase agreement maintained pursuant to paragraph 11 is included. So what they're saying is that anything that was on the RPA when we said what we're leaving behind, like TVs, all that stuff is included. The term begins on the day after escrow closes on the purchase and sale agreement and shall terminate blank calendar days, whatever that may be. Let's say for this one, it's 45. Or you could pick a specific date. Doesn't matter. Tenant shall vacate the premises upon termination of the agreement unless housing provider and tenant have signed a new agreement mandated by any rent increase cap or just cause eviction control under any state or local law. Housing provider accepts rent from tenant other than past due rent, in which the case a month-to-month tenancy shall be created, which either party may terminate pursuant to California Civil Code. Rent shall be at a rate agreed by housing provider and tenant or is allowed by law. All other terms and conditions of this agreement shall remain full force and effect. So it has here what's going to get paid through escrow, right? So all of these things that you check are going to get paid through escrow. So maybe the security deposit is going to come out of the seller's proceeds. The first month's rent is going to come, or you're going to pay the entire rent. That's only if it's 6 months. You're not going to do that. Anything else as per the escrow instructions, any other things that you may do. Rent, this is the amount of rent and when it's going to be due, how they're going to pay, okay, who they're going to pay, okay. If any payment is returned for not, you know what, I did this wrong. You know what, no one, this thing was smarter than me. The sellers are the ones that are using this. I just realized I did that. Joneses. Sorry, it was just going through my head, and I realized what I did. How they're going to pay, who they're going to pay, right? And they're going to pay Jim Smith is who they're going to pay, okay? And what his phone number is and what his address is that they're going to send the payments to, that's fine. You could put all that stuff in. Or at any other location subsequently specified by housing provider in writing to tenant, and if checked, rent may be paid personally between the hours of blank and blank on the following days, if any payment is returned for non-sufficient funds. So as you look through this is a full-on lease agreement. This is very similar to a lease agreement that you would do with one of your tenants. So it's just much, much more specific because there's going to be subsequent payments that are going to get paid that don't happen when you're there 29 days or less. So remember, it's not just, hey, you guys are going to stay 30 days and that's it. You got to include this because there's a different civil codes and things that the buyer may fall in, the seller may fall into now as tenant. This is what you're going to charge for the late fee. If there's any parking issues, right? Like maybe there's not a parking spot, so you have to put that it's not included in the rent charges. Like you got to rent, if it's a condo, maybe they have to pay an extra rent for the parking spot. If there's any storage in there, the utilities, how the utilities are going to get paid, the conditions, what's going to happen to the conditions. It's like you got to do the move in, move out form basically again because they're tenants. Maintenance user reporting. They're gonna have to, what they're gonna tell you, what happens with the property, any malfunctions, damages, how they're gonna let you know who's gonna be responsible for what, as far as the maintenance goes. Pets. I mean, I would expect that if they have a pet already, you're not gonna tell them, oh, by the way, I don't rent to anybody with pets. If there's any rules or regulations that the housing provider may have now. Hey, I'm the owner now. These are specific rules I have. If it's a condo, you got to check this out on who the HOA is. That they can't do, alterations and repairs. They can't do anything without getting written approval from the housing provider, the landlord. How many keys and mailboxes, keys to the mailbox, keys to the house, keys to any common areas, how many remotes for the garage door openers or gate openers there are. You have to put that in. So again, it's much, much more detailed about insurance, all of the stuff that's in there. So I need you guys to just understand that once you exceed that 29 days, this has to be incorporated. Okay? And the tenant rules are now a little bit different. And this one, you have to give them a written 24-hour notice before you can have access. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it that's a little bit different. And this one also, they have to give you the keys at close of escrow, not at the term. So they have to give you a copy of the keys because you now are a tenant. It would be just like if you closed escrow and the house was vacant and you moved a tenant in, you have a copy of the keys as the housing provider. So at this one, the close of escrow, you have to give them a copy of all the keys. Okay? So again, a little bit more involved. I would say that probably 90% or more of our transactions when a seller remains in possession fall under the terms of the SIP. You know, there's not that many that really fall into that residential lease after sale. So, like I said, 1 out of every 10, maybe, if that. It's probably 1 out of every 20 that happens. But you still have to understand that there's a difference between that time period. If there is a way for you to get your seller to agree to, they only need to, like if we're negotiating this and we're saying, hey, I know we need some time after close of escrow, if they need 30, 60, 90 days, it's going to make it harder, obviously, to sell the house because you're going to start cutting out things like FHA and VA buyers for that amount of time. If they need that, then we have to figure out a different way to look at this and maybe make it contingent so that we can, extend escrows and get them closer to that point where they don't need to remain in possession that much. The biggest time I see these residential lease after sales is where listing agents cannot either verbalize or explain the benefit of a contingent sale to a seller, and the sellers are refusing to make their sale contingent. They'd rather sell the house and then go find a house. And instead of finding a place to rent, they want to rent that house that they lived in. And that just becomes a difficult transaction because even then, there's not a lot of buyers that are in a position where they can allow somebody to rent for 2 months and not move into the house that they bought. So just keep that in mind when you're having these conversations with your seller about them remaining in possession. If that's their approach to remaining in possession, let's push harder for a contingent sale. Okay, so let's go back to the purchase agreement. Any questions about those two that we just talked about? Anybody? Any questions at all? No? Okay. All right, so let's talk about tenant occupied units. Okay? So, this purchase agreement that we're looking at is the regular residential purchase agreement. This agreement is legal to use up to 4 units. I don't advise it, but it's legal to use up to 4 units. Okay? Now, when this says occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller, remember earlier I said you have to be careful when there is an adult child of the seller, because generally those adult children aren't going with the seller wherever they're going. Sometimes they are, so they're just going to move. It's not a problem. That's a conversation you could have with your seller. But if they're not, if there's an adult in there that is not the seller, that is living there, a brother, a sister, a cousin, whatever, somebody that's been staying there for long term, I would address this also. But let's look at tenants also, only right now, just tenants. So even if, let's say this is a single family, condo, townhouse, whatever you want to say. If there is a tenant in the property now, even if that tenant will be vacant prior to close of escrow, you still have to include the TOPA. Okay? You still have to include the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum, even if it's going to be vacant. That TOPA has nothing to do with forcing the vacancy. It is just stating there is a tenant. Okay? So, in the state of California, everywhere except for unincorporated parts of LA County, a single family residence is exempt from rent control restrictions. The rent stabilization in the city of LA does not apply to single family residents. Single family residents are standalone homes, PUDs, townhouses, condos. Those are even mobile homes. Those are not subject to the rent stabilization laws in the city of LA. For the state of California, the rent cap and just fees and all that stuff, let's, for lack of a better term, the rent control in California does not apply. The state one does not apply to single family residences, houses, PUDs, condos, townhouses, mobile homes. It does apply to units, 2 units plus. If you are writing an offer on a property anywhere in the state of California, in LA County, they have a different rent stabilization code, rent control code, whatever you want to say, than anywhere else, and it is exorbitant in the amounts that it is, and it applies to single family residences. So when you guys are dealing with single family residences and it's LA County, but it's not a city, it's got its own rules, and it could be really devastating trying to evict a tenant from there. We had an agent that had a nightmare of a deal, had elderly clients. They attempted to evict the tenants from a single family residence because they felt like, well, single family, it's not none of the rent control laws apply. And they didn't know that in that unincorporated part of LA County that it did. And I think it was like the minimum to evict these people was like $15,000, but the tenants, because of the wrongful eviction, sued the sellers for the owners, the housing providers, for like $50,000. It was just a nightmare. I think it resolved itself finally, but it went on for a really extended period of time trying to get that home sold. So please be careful before you say for sure, hey, no, don't worry, we could evict that tenant. Don't be so sure. Contact somebody who's really fluent in all of the tenant protection laws that exist out there before you try to just start the eviction process. Okay, how does it apply when the garage has been converted and being rented out? Is the property considered as 2 units? Okay. If it's an illegal garage conversion, well, let's start this way. That converted garage in LA City rent control is considered a unit, even if it's illegal. Anyway, while I'm doing this, I can continue. If it's in a city of LA rent control and it's an illegal unit, they treat it like a regular unit. The rules apply to those tenants just as if it was a legitimate unit. The problem is that when we start talking about illegal units, and let's assume that it's a converted garage that is not legal, because that's the norm, right? Is that they do that. They convert a garage and somebody moves in there. One of the problems with somebody renting, and let me just bring up the TOPA. Sorry, guys. There we go. One of the issues with those illegal units is that if you attempt to evict them, or at any point, renting a tenant to a legal unit could subject you to a lawsuit of 9 times the entire rent paid by that tenant. And I think that's the amount. It's 9 or 10. But renting illegal units is scary, right? So what I would suggest you do is, if you have somebody that has that converted garage or an ADU, and I can't tell you for sure if an ADU now converts it to 2 units as far as rent control laws go, or tenant protection laws go, contact a reputable either eviction attorney or eviction company, and they'll be able to give you a much better complete rundown of what to and to not to do. And the reason it's hard to say for sure don't do this or you can do that is because there are so many little local ordinances that change things that we never are aware of, like what happened in LA County that we all became aware of now, and it was probably been in place for a really long time, and we just weren't aware of it, which is, our fault. But because we don't generally deal with property management, it's hard to know what all those tenant rules are and how often they change. So this is the TOPA. And what I was saying about tenant occupied properties is please be careful. If a seller or listing agent assures you that a unit is going to be vacant at close of escrow, and we're talking about units here, be wary of the fact that it's even going to be possible that they could vacate those tenants. Look, I mean, I think I talked about this a few times when we've had this conversation. We had an agent here in the office. They wrote an offer. The listing agent, the seller, it was on 4 units, I think, assured them that the tenants were going to be moving out. And I think 2 or 3 of the units did, and one of them didn't. And that escrow lasted, I think it was like 8 months by the time it closed. The buyer held on because they were getting a good deal, but you were in escrow for like 8 months, and there was nothing you could do about it. So you got to be really careful, guys. Please, please, please. As listing agent, don't promise your sellers you can vacate a unit, because there's, in the state of California, let's forget about City of LA rent control. The only reasons I can evict the tenant are, and these are in units, seller's going to move into the property. Okay. I own that unit. I want to live in it. I can evict you legally. Not a problem. Depending on how long you've been there, to be a 30 or 60 day notice in order for you to move out. I want to move in my son, daughter, mother, father, that close of family, not my cousin, uncle, brother, not them. Immediate family, I can evict you for that. I want to remove it from rentals altogether. Like, we're going to take it out of rentals. I'm going to clear all these units out. I'm never going to rent it again. Maybe my whole family's going to move in. Doesn't matter. I'm removing it from the rent roll. That one's a little one that's harder to prove, right? If I'm going to do extensive remodels that would cause it to be uninhabitable, with permits, the whole thing, I can then evict you. 30, 60, 90-day notice, whatever's applicable. That's it. Now, besides the tenant being at fault, they didn't pay rent, they broke the lease agreement, that's different. But if I'm doing this as a no-fault eviction, those are the only reasons why I can do it. And to do that for the state of California, I'm not talking about City of LA rent control, because that's a whole different thing. To be able to do that, I have to give you at least 1 month's rent and relocation funds. That's what it's going to cost me. But please, guys, be careful when you're getting involved in any deal that has tenants. Do not assure either your buyer or your seller that you can vacate those tenants, because the chances are you can't. And it's going to cause a much bigger issue in the future than just trying to sell it with those tenants in possession. Okay? Now, if there's a legit reason to evict them and you want to evict the tenants before you put the property in the market, do that. Don't make your transaction subject to something that you may not be able to complete. That makes it much more difficult to get things closed. The tenant occupied property, this is just going to say if the tenants are remaining in possession, they're remaining in possession. That's it. I'm buying it with the tenants in possession. We don't have to do anything. If it's going to be delivered vacant, if it's a house, then yes, just check the box delivered vacant. If it's units, which unit? Which unit is going to be vacant? Okay. If seller, after exercise of good faith attempts and subject to applicable laws, unable to remove existing tenants by close of escrow or 5 days prior, which you should always check. If this is what you're agreeing upon, is that unit number 1 is going to be vacant, and it's going to be vacant 5 days prior to close of escrow. That's what you want, not at close of escrow. Buyer may cancel his agreement, and buyer's sole remedy shall be return of deposits and buyer's reasonable out-of-pocket expenses for inspection reports and appraisal fees under the agreement. Now, if I'm doing this from a seller, I'm going to check this and say, well, I'm going to limit those fees to $500. You're going to get your deposit back, and I'll give you an additional $500 for any out-of-pocket expenses. But you guys have to understand, it's already built into the contract that says, as seller, I can't force them to. If I as seller can't get that unit vacant by 5 days prior to close of escrow, I can't stop the buyers from canceling. Even if they've removed their contingencies, I can't keep their deposit. I have to give them their deposit back. And it says in there that my remedy is to get my deposit back and reasonable expenses. So what I'm going to do to protect myself as seller is I'm going to make sure that box is checked and limit it to 500, 1,000, whatever it is that you feel is fair. Okay. If seller is able to remove existing tenants prior to close of escrow, seller is applicable shall disclose to buyer when the property became vacant, whether the tenant vacated voluntarily, and if so, whether seller paid the tenant to leave, whether the seller filed a lawsuit, unlawful detainer, or attempted to evict the tenant, and if so, whether the lawsuit ended in a judgment. Seller within 5 days prior to close of escrow shall deliver to buyer the names of all adult occupants residing in the property other than the seller that are known to the seller, or the following are the names of all adult occupants other than the seller that are known to the seller. They have a list right there. Even if, pursuant to this agreement, seller remains in possession after close of escrow, no tenant shall remain except who's there. So what I'm saying is this is the, if they have somebody that's living in the house and you give them like, hey, I'll give you 5 days or whatever after close of escrow, they can remain. If you don't want that adult that's in there that's not an owner of the property, you can list them in there. This is if the buyer is the tenant that's buying the property and what unit they're in. Tenant remaining in possession. This talks about the unearned rents, any changes that might happen, the personal property that may be included in the sale. Here's the documentation. Always make sure you're asking for the tenant estoppels when you're submitting this as a buyer. Okay, you want the tenant estoppels. Tenant estoppels are just tenants answer questions, and it's just to show that they have the same information that the seller may have disclosed to you, the housing provider may have disclosed to you about rents and security deposits and things like that. The security deposits are an itemization of all lawful deductions made from the tenant's security deposits, if any, and a statement of the security deposit remaining after any lawful deductions have been made. So that's them saying, here's all the deposits I have, and if I've already taken some money out of it. Okay, everybody signs. So this has to be included if the tenant is vacating or remaining. It doesn't matter. You have to put it in. All right, so we went a little long because I had that little technical difficulty. But quickly, if anybody has any questions about what we covered today, and again, we'll keep moving forward with the purchase agreement. Not next week, because next week there is no class, so it'll be in 2 weeks. Any questions? Any questions today? Look, guys, I appreciate you sitting through this. I know that this is, this is not the most exciting information, but it's so important that we understand how this works because there's so many little tiny things that can get in our way, So please take this stuff seriously. Please, if you missed any of it, please go back. It'll be on YouTube later today. You can go back and review it. If you share this with people, all of that great stuff, please, thank you so much. Like it, comment on it. It helps me on YouTube for people to see it, more people to see it. So make comments, like the stuff, do all of that. I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate you watching it there. Thank you guys so much. Be productive and be safe. Talk to you soon.